right. Good morning, everybody. Great to see you all. Welcome to another fine episode of the Paint and Pipette podcast. This one is an incredibly special episode because it's jointly hosted by my great friend, Greg McKeown, the two-time New York Times bestselling author who is also a former teaching instructor with me at the Stanford D School. Greg and I are thrilled to get to invite to the stage today Ron Johnson. And Ron is an accomplished executive with innumerable qualifications. Today, we wanted to invite Ron to focus on his relationship and some key moments with Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs is a leader whom both Greg and I admire deeply. And Ron is one of the very special individuals who's had the chance to work with Steve over many years. So we are really looking forward to this conversation. Fellow Steve Jobs junkies, welcome. We're glad to be with you. And Ron, thank you for joining us today.
Well, it's my pleasure, Jeremy and Greg. It'll be a fun conversation, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, let's go right to the beginning. Ron, you have been one of the very key members of the Apple mafia in building this tremendous company, and I think it either could not have been done without you or would look very different if it had not been for your involvement. And I just wonder if you could go back to your beginning with Steve and your onboarding, or how he managed to get you to come and join Apple in the first place at a time when Apple wasn't what it is when people think of the company today.
Yeah, well, I think Apple would be a great company without me. Don't have any question about that. But hopefully I left, a little mark when I was there for a dozen years.
Oh, certainly.
I was about turning 40, and I had made a decision to be a retail guy. I was working at a company in Minneapolis called Target, we all know, and Target was flourishing. The stock had gone up a dozen times in the last 8 years or something like that. And I was one of the merchandising leaders who had really put design on the map for the Target, reinforcing Target's Target, this really cool place. And Steve had concluded, unbeknownst to me, that if Apple had any chance to win, it had to control the customer experience. He had come back to Apple in 97, launched the iMac. That's what I noticed. I mean, that iMac was a beautiful product when that came out. Yes. Huge impact on the world of merchandising, everything. But 3 years later, the market share was still really small. And so Steve wanted to open stores. And someone reached out to me.
Which, by the way, that's not obvious that he would have wanted to do that. It wasn't like there were lots of other tech stores at the time that were working and thriving. You had some pretty big fails, in fact, that you see out there.
Yeah, so, it was completely counterintuitive because remember, in 2000 was the peak of the dot-com boom. Everything's going to the internet. And in the
bricks and mortar.
And Apple had less than 5% market share. People owned PCs back then. And it was Dell. Dell was winning with their online model. And there was one retailer you might remember called Gateway. Lots of funny stories about Gateway, but they had 300 stores, but they couldn't make their stores work serving the 95%.
Yes.
And people said, well, how is Apple, who really serves a creative pro with super expensive products, going to make retail work? Why would they do that when the world's going online? Mark Andreessen about that year announced, stores are dead. In the future, we won't go to stores.
Yes.
So it was very counterintuitive thought by Steve and the team at Apple.
And so he reaches out to you.
Yep.
And he calls you, he emails.
No, he hired a recruiter.
Okay. So a recruiter comes to
identify, who could do this job. And from my understanding, there were about 4 or 5 people they were talking to. I was the only one.
You know who the other people were?
No, I don't know them. I think I heard their names at some point, but I didn't.
Sure. Okay.
So most of them were like they were like CEOs of companies.
Yes.
I was this guy who was identified because of work I'd done at Target. And
your work at Target was distinct. I mean, you that design showed that you could differentiate a company by the design and experience that they have when they go into the shop, even when it isn't like let's say a high-end brand that's all about designer. It's still design, but it's design for everyone, let's say, or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Target was always trying to be different. I had this view they had to be preferred, which was different and better. Now, you can have different merchandise, but that doesn't mean better. You're just not competing with Walmart. That was our big competitor.
Right.
And the way to be different and better was to do something original. And so we partnered with an architect named Michael Graves, who had done beautiful buildings and products for an Italian company called Lessie. And we did this amazing line of home products. And we launched with 140 items. And we launched at the Whitney Museum in New York. And Target didn't even have stores in New York or the Northeast yet.
No
and
way.
It was one of these moments in the industry that captured people's attention. And so Mickey Drexler was on Apple's board at the time. I think he probably had input into, you should find out who's doing that work at Target. And there were a lot of people at Target doing great work, but the work I did kind of stood out, I think.
What was your reaction when they get that first call?
Well, I was kind of like, why would I do this? Target's this great company. Apple's losing money.
Yes.
How did you answer that question? I mean, that's a great question. How'd you answer it?
But I the thing about Target, like many companies, they saw me as being this very good merchant. And I was just doing merchandising over and over again. But I went into retail because I wanted to do the whole retail thing. And so this was a chance to start from scratch a retail chain for a great brand. And I had this confidence because if I could make Michael Graves, who no one's heard of really, help transform Target, imagine having a brand like Apple with their products, how a well-designed retail experience could change that company. And so I was inspired to
by the opportunity, you can build it from the ground up.
So I said, why not go out? So they invited me like one Monday in November to go meet Steve. That's the first time I met him. I flew out to San Francisco and had a meeting at 5 o'clock. I remember arriving, 1:45, sitting in a chair outside his conference room. On the tables were all these, business magazines with him on the cover. So I'm peeking at these. And 5 o'clock comes and Steve's not there yet. I said, well, that's all right. And then I'm looking at, all of a sudden at about 10 minutes later, I look to my left and I see this knee. Now I'm coming from Target where people dress up, and it's a torn pair of Levi's jeans. And I look up and there's this black t-shirt and I guess that's Steve. And we met and I bet we spent 2.5 hours together in a little conference room outside his office.
Wow.
And it was just like this unbelievable conversation. I loved talking to him. I was inspired by him. I didn't know much about him, but he was absolutely the smartest person I met. And at Target, whenever I wanted to innovate, I had to push really hard because it was way beyond what Target was comfortable with. It was the opposite with Steve. Whatever
you're pushing an open door.
No, and he's taking whatever I'm thinking about to the next level. And I was very inspired. And so we chatted for a long time. And then he said, Ron, I really like you. Why don't we do this? Why don't you come back in a couple of weeks after Thanksgiving? We'll meet again. But if you could do one assignment for me, I'd like you to write up for me, if I gave you this job, what you would do. How would you approach it? I said, I can do that. And he'll send me an email. Well, I said, I don't have an email.
No way.
This is 2000. Now Target didn't have email.
That's amazing.
No one did, but
you didn't have an email when talking to Steve Jobs for the job at Apple. That's a great moment.
I didn't have a computer. No one did.
That is a bit unthinkable, though. It's still a bit unthinkable what you just said.
No, it is. And so Steve said, he was like, I'll send you a computer. He goes, you should get the Mac anyway. So they sent me a computer. I just set it up. I typed up something on whatever it was at the time. It wasn't Pages, whatever Apple was using. You could probably know Jeremy. And then, so I sent it to him. Then I went back 2 weeks later on a Monday night. And Steve had set up for me to meet other members of the executive team. And so I met, Mickey Drexler, I saw him in his office. I met Phil Schiller and Tim Cook and a lot of people we know today.
Yes.
And then at 5 o'clock, I met Steve again. And I said, so what'd you think of my little write-up? He goes, not very much, but I'm going to offer you the job anyway. So let me tell you about it.
No
And
way.
so literally he offered me the job the third hour I ever met him. And it was a really generous offer. And I was going to join the executive team at Apple. And, you know, so I said, give me a month. I'll think about it and make a decision. And that was kind of it. But it was really, you always remember the first time you meet somebody.
Well, that's what I want to go back to.
Yeah.
So you have that very first moment, but then you have this 2.5-hour meeting, and you said you loved that conversation. But can you know, like if we were fly on the wall for that conversation, what was discussed? What do you remember from it?
Well,
Any specifics?
It was just wide ranging. But I remember at one point saying to Steve, we were talking about store size. And I said, well, how big do you think the store should be? He goes, I don't know. I said, well, I've always felt the size of the brand correlates with the size of the store. A lot of these computer stores are really tiny because the products are small. You don't have many. But that makes you think it's a small idea. And I said, you're on the board of the Gap. You know, the Gap feels like the right size store. He goes, I like that. I said, so how many products do we have? I didn't know Apple's product lineup. He said, we've got 4. And he goes, I'll show them to you. So he walked me down to the boardroom, and on this little table were 2 pro computers, a desktop and a portable, and 2 consumer, a desktop and a portable. And that was it. And I said, well, we've got 32 square feet needed to merchandise our products. That leaves us 4,968 square feet of space to create a great experience.
And did you think that immediately?
Yeah, right away. Yeah, because that's, as a merchant, you're always thinking through presentation of a product and then what's around it. And I said, but he loved that. He wasn't intimidated by the fact that he had very few products. And we talked about things. I said, well, what if we devoted half the store to service? You know, our goal is to reach out to new customers. You're doing this to expand market share. He had this great phrase, 5 down, 95 to go. We have 5% market share. We're building stores to get the next 95.
I love that.
That was Steve's idea. And so we're going to reach out to 95. Well, if you're going to get someone to switch to Apple, which is expensive and unusual, and that's a big move for somebody, you got to stand behind the product. And I said to Steve, the best stores are intuitive. You just understand them from the moment you walk in. And he would immediately embrace that, being a purist in design. And I said, let's devote half the space to owners and half to new customers. Right. And that kind of set up the whole, but we just talked effortlessly about store design, location, movies, people, life. I mean, it was just a fun conversation.
What did you talk about with life? Do you remember?
Not that conversation, but let me move to the next one then. Another idea. So now I decided to join Apple, and I started February, like a couple months later, and I came out for my first day at work, and I go to check in at the lobby at, you know, building 1 Infinite Loop. And I'm always early. I'm an early guy. And I go, I'm here. I'm new employee, Ron Johnson. And the guy looks down and says, there's no Ron Johnson starting today. We have 5 people starting. You're not starting. I said, well, I think I have an ET meeting, you know, because I have an ET meeting. I'm on the executive team. But you're not on here. He goes, I've got A, B, C. He goes, I've got a John Bruce starting. And I go to myself, wait, my name's Ronald Bruce Johnson. He goes, oh, Steve sometimes makes code names for people. My first day, I've got a code name. Now, I'm a pretty well-known retail guy, and he's trying to hide me because he doesn't want people to know he's going to open stores. But so I went out, we had our ET meeting, and then ET's done. I was very quiet. I was just listening. It's like a 3-hour meeting.
Did you introduce yourself as John Bruce, by the way?
I should have. I don't think I did. But
so this is your first executive meeting. You've met them individually, but now you're seeing them.
I met most of them. Yeah, I sat there, and I was kind of a bump on the log because it was like a new language to me. You know, everything they're talking about operating systems and OS 10 and chips and a level of detail that I wouldn't have been aware of, not being an Apple guy, tech guy.
It's not your background.
Not having an email account.
No. So then at the end of the meeting, I go back to my office. I'm by myself. You know, what do I do the rest of my life at Apple? You know, I get this call from Steve's assistant, Andrea. Can you come down? Steve would like to see you. And his office was, you know, I'd walk by Tim Cook, and then Steve. I think that was kind of the sequence. So I went to see Steve, and he goes, Ron, he goes, are you excited to be here? I said, yeah, I'm real excited. And he said, great. He said, what time do your kids go to bed? I said, 8:00. He said, good. Can I call you? I said, sure. He said, every day. I said, okay, sure. I said, 5 days a week or 7? He said, 7. I said, okay. But he said, the reason I want to call you, he said, I have a handful of people I am very close to at Apple that I work with. And I want them to know how I think about everything. And so when we chat, we're going to talk about our personal lives, our work lives, movies. He goes, I'm not into sports, but we'll talk about all that stuff. And he said, but then within a year, you will be free as a butterfly to do whatever you want at Apple. And the only time you have to come to me if you don't know how I think about something. You know, it was interesting. So he committed
it's serious empowerment. That's what he's really going for here.
The best delegate. It's so counterintuitive. You hear Steve he was involved with it. He loved the big picture and all the details. But he was by far the best delegator I've ever seen.
But wait, did he call you after bedtime?
He called after 8:00 every day. Phone would ring every night at 8:00. I mean, I'm sure there are nights that were missed, but I'd say the majority of the nights for the next year, Steve would call, and a lot of times it'd be just, hi. I felt like an 8th grade girlfriend, you know. It was bringing me back to when I was, getting on the phone and doing that. But we would just talk. And
so he wouldn't have an agenda. He wouldn't be saying, hey, here are the 3 things I want to talk about.
No, but when you talk to me about, we talk about, he'd up to me on Apple things. He says, let me tell you some things I'm thinking about at Apple, or things we talked about at the ET meeting, and blah, blah, blah. So I bet half was Apple, half was personal. Most of the conversation will last 30 minutes. They weren't super long, but it wasn't 5 minutes. It was an investment. I was just so impressed with all that he had going on, that he committed that time to get to know me. But it was how he created leverage, because where he wanted to spend his time was on the products, the marketing. That's where Steve's true passion was. He delegated other things. Now, he loved the stores. He loved helping design some of the stores. Had great passion for it, but he didn't want to get involved with the details. He just didn't have time. So I was one of the lucky ones, probably like Tim Cook and a few others, who got to work with Steve without a lot of Steve oversight. I was given a lot of personal freedom with my team to do what we believe was right. And it got to a point, my last years, every 6 months, I'd see Steve every week at executive team, and I talked to him all the time. But I'd say, Steve, can you come over? I want to show you some of the stores we're going to build. And we'd set up a room with models of 20 stores around the world, or 15 stores. And he just loved to look at them and get into the details. But he truly was a great delegator. And,
so I want to riff on this for a second. So the book that people most cite when they're thinking of Steve is the Isaacson biography. But there's another biography called Becoming Steve Jobs. And let me just ask, were you involved in either of those projects? Were you interviewed by either?
I was interviewed by Walter for his book.
Are you familiar with the Becoming Steve Jobs book?
Who was the author? Do you remember? I don't believe I was. No, I don't believe so.
Well, the reason I ask is because in the second book, you get a sense of the journey that Steve went on while he's gone at Next. This 10-year journey, longer than many people imagine. And the change between this sort of, let's say he's a visionary startup at first, but some of the criticism that's in the press about how he handles people and how harsh he is on everything, and this idea that he actually transforms, he becomes a different leader. Not that he's a perfect leader afterwards, but that he is materially different. And it's been always my position that the media never caught up on the change. And so they're still imagining him as just hey, he's kind of a jerk. That's it. That's the story. But when in all the work I've done at Apple and all the executives I've worked with personally, that's not the story. It's not that he couldn't be harsh or couldn't be, he was certainly seeking clarity. But that, this idea of like, yeah, you don't do the best work of your life for just someone who's a tyrant. Like, that's not the reality behind it.
Steve was not a tyrant at all. He had such passion for people and products. He loved his family. He loved the people he was close to. He had a relatively small number of people he was close to. And there were people he was a lot closer to than me, like Johnny and Bill Campbell. Yeah. And, I was one of the ones, we were very close, I think, but I wasn't in that super tight. I don't pretend to be, but we had a great relationship. But what Steve had was the highest standards of anybody you'd ever meet. And he wanted you to be your best. And he actually got most people to be better than they would be on their own.
And a tyrant doesn't achieve that. No tyrant does that.
And we were inspired. We were all inspired to try to meet or exceed Steve's high standards.
I wanted to ask about the standard piece, Ron. I don't know if one of your memories involves a Steve standard, but I'd love to hear a practical example of when you say he had higher standards than we had for ourselves. Is there a time where you remember him raising the bar for you?
Every meeting with him. Every meeting. So when we launched the store, so we leased this warehouse about 2 miles from campus, and we built out a prototype of a store. And at that time, I'd meet every Tuesday morning with Steve at 9 o'clock till noon. And he would want me, because he didn't have a cell phone, I would go to his office. He would drive over in his car, and we'd talk all the way over. And then we'd have our little retail walkthrough. And every week we would change the store. And we would have things we looked at: window displays, graphic panels, lighting, store design, fixtures, and every little detail you looked at. He would get into the details, and he would try. So every time it's like, how do we make this so good that Steve just looks at it and says, that's great, but he could never do it. He always had a way to make it better. And the input was exceptional. It wasn't like just a different opinion. It was a better opinion.
For example?
Yeah,
everything, every little thing. You look at a window display and, what that's going to communicate iPhotos. And he stares at it and he quickly reads, he goes, what if you did this? And you go, it would be better if we did that. And then we'd do that for the next week. So he just had an uncanny intuition about design or creativity or marketing, that he saw the world differently. And I got to learn from that, which was a wonderful thing. But there were a lot of interest. So I'll tell you another story that kind of relates to what you're asking about. About 9 months after I started, we were building out apps. A guy named Sina Tamadin was on the ET, a great leader. And he had done the first app, which was iMovie. It was really the first app Apple did. And then iTunes, which was our music app, which kind of connected with the iPod. And then we were creating a photo application, right? And Steve was super excited about these, and they were going to be announced, I think, one of them at the next Macworld in January. And, I was just sitting there listening. I called one of our 8 o'clock calls, like on a Friday night. I said to Steve, I've been thinking about this. The Mac is kind of like the computer's at the center of your digital universe. And I explained this thing that, like the computer's here, but we connect our camera with an app, and there's this, and you connect this and that. And he goes, can you send me an email with that? I said, sure. And I wrote him a little note, we talked about. And the next week we get into the ET meeting. He stands up and he walks in late and he goes to the chalkboard or whiteboard and he says, let me tell you, I've got the future of the Mac. And I'm going to announce it at Macworld. And he goes, it's called the Digital Hub. You remember that? The Digital Hub, the Mac,
of course.
The hub. I'd call it a universe or whatever it is, but it was this hub. And so he went through that, and it was great. The team loved it. The whole ET did. We kind of all bought into it. So the next morning, though, was my retail day. So I stopped by his office in the morning. And I said, Steve, I've been thinking, if you really like this digital hub, which I think is great, we've got to change the store design. Because our store is going to open in January when you announce the digital hub, and our store is built around products. It's got to be built around what you do. Photos and movies and music. We've got to change this.
Mm-hmm.
He looked at me and he was so upset. He said, Ron, do you know I've spent now, that time it was probably 9 months with you every Tuesday, helping design this first store. And it's being built as we speak. But this is like starting over. Do you know what a big deal this is? He goes, I don't know if I have the energy to do this. You know, it's one of those moments. And I looked at him and I said, okay, so let's get over there. And he says, but don't say a word about this to anybody because I don't know if it's the right thing to do. I said,
That's great.
It's okay. So we get in his car and not a word said for this 10-minute ride over.
Oh, this is a very awkward drive.
It was a quiet drive.
Oh, in the 8th grade kind of dating relationship, sometimes there are awkward drives. This fits perfectly.
It's that silence that you want to break, but you know you probably shouldn't. Yeah. So we get there, we get out of the car, it's still silent. We walk in, and all these probably 25 people are sitting there, and the store's set up, looking really ready to go. It's perfect. And Steve walks in, he goes, well, Ron came to me today and told me our store's all wrong. And he's right. So I'm going to leave now, and he's going to tell you how you're going to redesign the store. And he walked out. That was it. So he went from, what the heck are you talking about, to processing this. And I'm standing all alone, and my team's looking there going, what just happened? You know? But then that night when he called me at 8:00, he said, I realized on the car ride over, as much as I didn't want to redo the store, every great movie we've done at Pixar, we get down to the end and, you know, we're 3 months from release. We realize there's a better ending. And you have to have the courage to give up what's very good to do what's great.
Yeah, that's a great story.
Wow.
You know, that was kind of the story there. And he said, it's like our store. He goes, it doesn't matter if we open our store in January, February, March. We're going to open it once. We got to open it right. So thank you for bringing that up. You know, and so that was Steve. So obviously that shows, though, he wants you to be direct. He wants you to share ideas. He might react pretty harshly at first for a variety of reasons, but he processes quickly. You know, I had that when I called him up about the Genius Bar. I remember I called him one day and I wanted to make service the feature of the stores. And I said, you know, we're going to create a place, Steve. Imagine this. Everyone else that has, you know, other companies that do service, they hide it. They don't want you to ever think when you're buying a product that it might not work. And the computer would put it in a separate room, maybe another building. And I said, let's put ours in the center of the store. Let's make it a big deal. And imagine if getting help at a bar, let's make a bar. And, you know, when you think of a bar, you think of a bartender and they can make any drink on the planet. And they remember my name and they're friendly. And you're just really comfortable at the bar. Imagine getting support for your computer that felt like you're at the nicest bar with a bartender. And we're going to call it the Genius Bar. And we're going to put the smartest Apple people in every city behind that bar. And he looked at me and goes, you know, you had me until you don't realize, Ron, you don't know technology. There's nobody who knows computers who can talk to people. They're all geeks. And he said, they really are. And he said, if you want to call it the Geek Bar, maybe that makes sense. And I said, hey, Steve, I think you're wrong. Retailers hire young people that grew up, they know computers. You know all the geeks because you're older. We're older. And 5 minutes, literally 30 minutes later, Nancy Heinen, the general counsel at the time, calls me up and says, Ron, can you tell me about Genius Bar? Steve wants me to trademark this name, Genius Bar. And so he went, you know, literally in 5 minutes from bad idea to great idea, you know, and that's just Steve, you know.
Yeah, but there's I mean, Tim Cook's talked about that, about how that's sort of a genius thing that he can do, that he would come fighting, arguing for one idea day one, day two, he's arguing the exact opposite as if he never held the previous opinion. And he describes that as a gift. Here's what it seems to me is that it's about clarity, that at any given moment, you know what he's thinking. No, this is a problem. This is how it feels. No, you're right. I'm wrong. Let's move forward. That there isn't this endless ambiguity that makes up for so much of the communication, especially in corporations where everyone's sort of they'll use jargon and try to sort of don't play your cards too early because you might be wrong and then you look stupid. It's like he removed that in one sense from these communications that he's having with you. What am I getting wrong?
No, you got it exactly right. Now, Steve loved to play argue both sides of any problem he had. Mm-hmm. But then he'd end every conversation. It was really interesting that we'd spend, an hour debating, what do we do here? And then he'd say, now let's walk through the logic tree one more time. Whatever we agreed to. And he'd say, here's the problem. Here's the solution, and it all would make sense, So he loved to debate things, and he would go until he was done. There was never a clock on a Steve meeting. It goes as long as it needs to. It was done when it was done. And
were there ever, Ron, the two examples you gave us are both from this is a bad idea to this is a good idea, which that's got to feel great, right? And I can imagine that kind of clarity, to me, I wonder, does it cut both ways? Were there times where something was a great idea and quickly became a bad idea? And how did that go?
No, not many times. I'm sure there were. I mean, you always have, because I'd have to think about that. There were some locations we had that Steve didn't like. There was one on 34th Street in New York that we actually walked away from. He was right on that. No, there were a lot, but I want to go back, if I could, to what Greg said. Steve believed that it was interesting. He knew I valued kindness. That was my number one. It's always been my number one thing. Kindness is a choice we make. I tell my kids, someone's the best athlete in the class. That's a gift. My kids were both really smart. You guys are really smart. That's a gift. To be a kind person, that's a choice you make every day, right? And Steve knew I believed in kindness. And he said, Ron, when I think of kindness, the highest form of kindness is telling the truth. Letting someone know where they stand. Because I wear my opinions on my sleeve. You will always know when I like something and when I don't. And he was right on that, because I never had any doubt about where I stood with Steve. There were times
there's a great expression from a GSP professor. I don't know if Greg, if you ever took his class, but Irv Grossbeck, he has this great quote. He's one of the owners of the Boston Celtics, and he often says, never mistake vagueness with compassion.
Totally.
Right.
Totally. Clarity is kindness. But the thing that one has to wrestle with for a moment is how different that is from most management experiences and most corporate cultures. They do not breed clarity. They breed, confusion, ambiguity, guessing. Everyone's reading the tea leaves for everything. Well, what does the person think? And the business thinks this. And you just live your life in these organizations in a guessing mode. And I think it produces, of course, it's frustrating for everyone, but I think it makes everything so much harder.
I agree.
And so
Greg, I think that's because it goes back to that classic management leadership paradigm. Most companies are managed. Harvard Business School teaches you to be a manager, right? Apple is a culture of leadership, right? Steve's the leader. Leaders are comfortable pushing the envelope. Leaders are comfortable making opinions. Management cultures, it's like, well, I can't present this idea unless I get approval in advance. I've got to make sure everyone in the pyramid supports before I talk about something. It's just a different culture. But that's what made working at Apple during the time I was there, at least, super unique. And I think Steve's relationship was the same with every other leader of the ET. That's kind of how he loved to work. And we all adapted to him. But he was so authentic. Authenticity is the other thing he really valued. He said, if I'm myself, you will learn to work with me. If I'm not authentic, you're going to wonder, well, which Steve is this, So
you'll never know what you're getting.
You never know what you're getting. So he was just an authentic, passionate person who wanted to change the world. And he had done that when he was in his 20s with the Apple, And I think once you do that, he just lived to have these great moments where he created things that changed the world, whether it's a movie a product, an application. And he would live for these things. It was like one hit after the next. And he wouldn't bring them out until they met his standard.
Mm-hmm.
When we were doing the iPhone, a lot of people thought it would never come out because you could never build a phone that he would meet a standard, and it took a long time. But that's why he was so exceptional at what he did, And that was true with our stores. So another kind of interesting moment I remember is he used to love to come to the openings of our big flagship stores. He flew to Tokyo. Thanksgiving weekend, we opened our first international store at the Ginza in Tokyo. He came to New York when we opened a store, our first New York store, the post office down in Soho. And that was an interesting story because we timed the opening to Macworld. We used to do 4 Macworlds a year. There was a New York Macworld. We had the opening the day after Macworld, and our openings had been legendary. We get thousands of people waiting in line. And we had the Macworld. The papers were pretty negative on Macworld. For whatever reason, it was kind of like writing Apple's death. The company stock price was at an all-time low. There weren't a lot of believers in what Steve and everyone was doing. We were all doing. So Steve gets over to the opening at 9:00, and there are 45 people in line. Nobody's there.
Wow.
And I had misjudged. I didn't realize in New York, people stay out late. They don't get up early. Right? Steve walks in. He goes, well, this is a great opening. I said, I'm sorry. We probably should open a different time or a different day. And he said, I should just give up. He pulls me aside. He goes, I'm just tired. I've been working really hard. Nobody cares. We did Macworld yesterday. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about your store here in New York. He goes, I'm going to leave. I said, okay. So he went back to the hotel, right? Tough day. Tough day for me, tough day for Steve. And about 11:00, we start counting. We had a clicker. 1,000 people walked in the store that hour. And at 12:00, it was busier. They're starting to line up outside. So I called Steve up. He was staying up at the 4C. I said, Steve, you got to come back. He goes, no. He said, I want you to come back. And he said, I've already been there once today. I saw the store. I said, will you please come back? He said, okay. He came down, got there around 1:00. The store was filled. He came in, looked around. We walked up to the stairs. There was this glass bridge on the second floor at the back of the store. You might recall if you've been there, under a skylight. Steve and I stood there till 7:30 at night.
Wow.
6.5 hours, whatever that is, just watching customers, soaking in. And it was one of our great moments together because it was the first time he saw the love, why he wanted the stores. He wanted to connect with the customer. He's not doing that every day, but he saw people after people coming in, trying his products, getting help with the Genius Bar, buying everything he dreamed of happened in that moment. And that was just one of the most beautiful moments for the two of us. And a few years later, we opened that Fifth Avenue store, the Glass Cube, and Steve played a big part in helping us create that store. And
so let's go back to that moment, that sort of clearly really genuinely precious moment for you, for him as well. Everything you shared in the story is again this idea of, we could call it authenticity, but it's authenticity plus clarity. It's some other formula that's being created there where exactly what he's thinking. And so, including the disappointment. I should just give up. This is exhausting. I'm fed up with all of this. And so what he's dealing with. And then, no, I'm not coming down. Even that's clear. Okay, fine. I'm doing it. I'm all in if I'm doing it. I'm going to come. Fine. Like at every moment, and you know what you're dealing with, which flies in the face of this caricature that so frustrates me anyway. I don't know if it frustrates you or not, but this idea, when you create a caricature of Steve Jobs, you do a lot of damage without knowing it, because this sort of lazy journalism produces other people who are imitating not Steve Jobs, which itself would be is kind of problematic thing to do, but you're imitating a fabricated version of Steve Jobs. So now you just have a bunch of rubbish aspiring CEOs and executives who are doing what they think he was doing, which is not what he was doing. And I think it really actually has done a lot of damage for a lot of people, especially when the real version was something worthy of emulation. Anyway, just your reaction to any of
No,
that.
well, like I always felt I've got a pretty good EQ, but I think it goes back to Steve invested a lot of time with me, so I knew how he thought. And so I had good instincts about what he needed, when to use his time, like come back here, you're gonna love it. I had a good relationship with Steve. I was very lucky, and it came from good moments and hard moments, but I would guess most of the people that were close to him felt the same way. They knew what Steve was thinking at all times because he was so direct, so transparent, wore his opinions on the sleeve. And that's probably misunderstood because he was not ever mean to be mean. He was mean when he expected more. He didn't tolerate. He didn't tolerate good work. He wanted great work.
Ron, was it?
He didn't tolerate not very smart people. He expected me, if I brought someone in who wasn't very smart,
he wasn't going to enjoy that.
He wasn't going to enjoy that. He would let me know pretty quickly.
Yeah.
He would judge people in 1 minute. I mean, if they weren't smart, he would leave. And that wasn't very nice. I mean, it wasn't very nice. But I remember we had these 3 guys coming out. We were to do real estate, and I wanted to hire them, but I wanted Steve to meet them first. Another funny story. And they came into the room, and they were going to tell them about how they were going to do real estate for Apple and how they pick sites. And after 5 minutes, Steve said, you guys, you're not ready. You're wasting my time. And someone tried, I don't want to hear from you. You guys might not be smart enough to work for Apple. And he walked out. And we all sat there and going, wow, that was interesting. But he didn't feel they were prepared. And I went to him, he said, Ron, he goes, if that's your group, he goes, I'm nervous. I said, look, I'll have him come back in a week. We'll meet again. He said, fine, I trust you, but have him come back in a week and hopefully they'll be ready. So a week later, we go through the same scene. We're in the same conference room where I'd interviewed with Steve, right next to his office. 1 o'clock comes, they're ready. 1:15 comes, Steve doesn't show up. And all of a sudden, Andres says, Ron, Steve wants to talk. He says, it's your call. Do what you want. And he didn't even meet them, So he was a great delegator, But he wanted to make sure we had high standards. So he could be, tough in that way. And most people would say, oh, he should have been more polite. But that was Steve. He had those moments.
Jeremy, you're going to jump in with something.
I was just curious, Ron. To me, it seems that clarity, I would hope it begets reciprocation, right? That you could also be clear with him. Yeah, and I wonder if it took any kind of adjustment on your part, because depending on the culture, I don't know what it was like at Target, but how was it for you adjusting to communicating with him?
Well, I was very comfortable telling Steve what I thought. I remember his commencement speech at Stanford, Jeremy. You might have been there, but I was pretty close to him when he was writing that. We'd talk about, what he's going to include. It was kind of fun. And he knew I was going to be there the day of his speech because I was a Stanford grad and all this stuff. And the ceremony's usually at 10 o'clock. At 11 o'clock, it was over. My phone rings. I'm still walking out of the stadium. And he goes, Ron, how are you? How are the stores? How's it going? He didn't ask anything about the speech. And I said to him, Steve, I thought I said,
actually, I got to pause on that. I know you're about to explain more, but that really is surprising. That really is surprising.
I knew he wanted to ask about it's only human nature, but I didn't bring it up at the start. I just listened, and he asked a couple of questions, and then I just said, there was an awkward pause. I said, Steve, people are saying great things about your speech. And he said, oh, that's nice, but what did you think? And I said, I thought it was good. I said, the stories were very well done. I liked how it was laid out. He said, okay, thank you. Hangs up. Phone rings in 2 minutes. Ron, give me a grade. He goes, I want to know how you think I did. And I gave him a B+. And he said, okay. And I told him why. And he said, thank you. And that was it. Now, I start reading the next day. This is like the world's best commencement address ever. And I'm kind of feeling like, I guess I missed that one.
No, but I actually, Ron, I think it's really intriguing because it reminds me when the iPad came out and Steve gets 1,000 emails, and many of them really brutal, because, okay, you've used a different lead, and, how dare you? He said it's just so much to swallow that getting this awful feedback. But then, of course, iPad goes on to be this runaway success. But I think the speech is a bit like that. The speech is I don't know, how would I describe it? It's not super high energy. It's very Steve, right? It's like, look, a little understated in the way I'm delivering this. But it's a speech that has become more and more beloved over time. And then with his death, suddenly everybody returns to it, rewatches it, and there's these personal stories. And it's like that has had a very long shelf life, maybe improved over time.
Exactly how wise Steve is. Because when I gave him the grade, it's kind of what you said, Greg. I said, Steve, you read the speech and I thought your energy level was low. I've had the privilege of sitting in the front row of you giving talk after talk after talk. And you're the most inspiring person I know. And I was engaged, but I wasn't inspired. And I would want to be inspired if I'm graduating. That was kind of the conversation. And that's why I gave you a B+. But if you think about, but he said to me, he said, Ron, the thing about a graduation speech, it's what they're going to remember is not how you felt. It's what you said. Every word matters. And the only way to get the words right was to read the speech. He goes, this is going to stand, it has to stand the test of time, not the test of today. Something along those lines. And he was right, though, but that's Steve. Steve had the ability to understand that he's going to do this once, that he had to be very personal, that he wanted to connect with these kids and kids forever and other people. But that was Steve. He had the ability to see things well beyond what I would look at. Just how'd you do on your speech today? He was looking at this, in perpetuity almost.
Yeah.
It's a particular story that captures my attention because, of course, all of us have given speeches, and I've spent a decent amount of the last sort of 20 years doing this. And so to be able to appreciate, okay, who knows how much really was design and how much it's hard to know what's intentional and what's not in this story. But even this idea of, no, I do have to read this one. Every word will count over time.
That was what he said. Yeah.
I mean that's a really important choice, because if you're reading a speech, it is hard to make it as immediately connected with the audience, because you're not responding to them. If they're a little less energy, you can jump up to energy. You can change your story. You can do all sorts of things if you're prioritizing the energy of the people in that audience in that moment.
Right.
But if you're saying, no, I want this to be for many, many audiences, and even for these people to watch again and again, I'm trying to craft every word. That's it's an interesting story when you see how it's all come out.
Yeah. The other one I was going to tell you real quick is when we opened the New York stores, we opened this beautiful Fifth Avenue store, and you get to do one store on Fifth Avenue ever. And the Apple store, was just turned out to be this unbelievable store. And it's one of the most, it's
iconic.
It
really is iconic.
Yeah. And I loved Harry Macklow, the developer, said Apple changed the skyline of Manhattan. Normally that's done at 55 or 60 stories. Yep. They did that in 32 feet.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which was a great quote. But what was interesting is, Steve came to the opening and we had fun, and we went to dinner that night down at Nobu in Soho, and we sat down to dinner. He said, what I love about Apple, and there were about 8 of us there, I think. He said, we're going to spend 5 minutes talking about the Fifth Avenue store, and the next 2 or 3 hours talking about the next store. Yeah, that's another thing about Steve. It was one thing at a time. Once he did it, he moved on. And it was about the next great thing he got to do. And that was a really interesting thing, because he wasn't ever pat himself on the back, look what I did. It was all about producing something. And I remember looking at the store, and he was going through every fitting in the glass, and his eyes looking at the stair and seeing how it was constructed and how well it was put together. And we met his standards, which was very gratifying. But he just loved the design and the beauty of a well-constructed piece. It was like a piece of art to him. And but I love that. I'll never forget that message. We'll spend 5 minutes talking about that store, and then we'll spend the rest of dinner talking about the next. And that's a good lesson for people.
Jeremy,
live your life forward. Live your life forward.
I'm mindful of time. I want to make sure that we hear, because I know you have one more moment that you want to talk about. Is that right, Ron?
Well, I don't, but you had said, if you can share kind of when you met Steve and the last time you saw him. And
yeah.
So I will tell you, I had a chance to go visit Steve at his home probably a week before he passed away. Maybe 8 days, maybe 6 days, in that, not at the very end, but, and I go to his house a lot. Most of my meetings the last few years were at his home. And, it was amazing. No security guards. It's so different than today. The door was unlocked. I would just walk in the front door, go to the kitchen, maybe see Lorene or the kids, go back to see Steve. There's no knocking on the doors, but it was very different. But I got there a lot. But the last time I went and saw him, we went there. He asked me to come over. Spent about an hour.
Can I interrupt for a second? I don't mean to, but I just, what you just said about it being different than today, I wonder really, because even back then there were plenty of Silicon Valley visionaries and bigwigs who had their entourage and had, and put lots of barriers between them and others. And so it just seems like it's more that he was different than it is just that the times were different.
Well, I agree with that.
Yeah.
But I live in an area where you know where the CEOs are, because the security guards are always outside the house 24 hours a day. People do that. And I think it was more Steve. You're exactly right. And but that last day we spent probably an hour, and it was really interesting. It was a lovely conversation. He was very frail, tired, laying in bed. But at the end, he said, Ron, he goes, you and Bill Campbell was his legendary, the coach of the Valley, and just a great guy, a terrific guy, good friend of mine, coached my son 8th grade football, a lot of history there. But he said, the two of you seem to like to hug people. I always see you hugging people when you say goodbye. I said, yeah, that's my nature. He goes, but you've never given me a hug. And I said, well, I just don't think you're that kind of guy. He goes, well, I'd really like a hug. And it was really touching. And so the only way to do it, I had to literally crawl in bed because he couldn't get out of bed. But we shared a pretty special moment. And that was a really nice way for him to say goodbye. And my guessing, he did that as much for me as for him. But it was a great memory.
Wow.
Earlier, you had said that Steve loved products and he loved people and he loved all of it. And I wanted to ask then, but this is like a better time to say it. Like, did you feel loved by Steve?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In a very authentic way. When I did something good, he would let me know, and his eyes would sparkle when he'd tell me, And when I did something bad, he would be very direct. But he shared great appreciation with me at all times. In that last conversation, he was very appreciative of all the work we'd done together. And I won't get into more than the hug, but it was, I felt very much loved by Steve. Yeah.
And at that point, you had already moved on from Apple, right? So
I hadn't left yet. No, I announced I was leaving, but Steve asked me to stay for 6 months or until he passed, because he was nearing the end. Okay. And so I was able to stay until he passed and then moved on. So that was kind of the time, Jeremy.
Okay. Yeah.
But thank you for asking.
Do you miss him?
I think about him all the time. What I mean is, I think everyone who works with him that closely would say the same thing. You're kind of asking, what would Steve do? He was such a clear thinker, and he had such a unique point of view to the world on so many subjects. You're constantly thinking about what would Steve do. So I think about him a lot. I do. And that's where it's actually been kind of fun to chat with you about it, because I haven't talked about him for a long time with someone. And hopefully hopefully through these stories, there's been something that will inspire someone to learn something from Steve. Something that at least I saw value in that will help them in their walk, whether it's whatever that might be.
Well, Ron, you've had a really unique seat at the table. Of course, this isn't the only contribution that you've made the period at Apple, but you were able to experience, observe, and be part of, the renaissance of Apple. Yeah. Really, I think the greatest turnaround in, certainly of that decade, but maybe of 50 years or something. I mean, it's an unbelievable turnaround story, especially as you look at sort of how it's all become as a company. And you were there at the table all through that, in the conversations with Steve directly. I know I'm speaking for Jeremy here, saying how grateful we are for you to take the time to share some of those poignant moments, some of those keys, and that can live on for a long time with us and for everyone who's listening. Thank you for your time and for your insights.
Well, you're very well. It was my privilege, my pleasure. But I will say I was just one of many. There were a lot of people. I made a little contribution, but so many people did. And I want to compliment Tim for what he's done. Tim joined about 95 or 7. He was there with the Mac. He was there throughout the retail stores. He helped with the retail stores. But, if Tim hadn't shepherded the company so fabulously the last decade, post Steve, the last 11 years since Steve's been gone, we probably wouldn't think about the company in the same way. Just be another company that had a moment. But it's endured. And so many of the products that have endured were ones Steve imagined. The iPhone, the iPad, the things he worked on, the apps, the way you have a unified system of hardware, software. So much in Apple was originally conceived by Steve, but Tim has taken that to another level. And the way he's built this business, when I joined Apple, we did $5 billion in revenue a year. Today, Apple does $3 billion a day.
That's insane.
So you think of the scale of that company with 1.2 billion. We had a few million customers. There's 1 billion too. It's remarkable what
it's a phenomenon.
All of the team at Apple has done through the years, led by Steve, continued with amazing leadership by Tim. I'm just happy to have been a part of it. So anyway.
I can't help but share a Tim moment here. I was at Stanford when he was the CFO and as a student, and we were invited to many events. You really are being spoiled all the time. Bill Gates is coming to speak at this event, and in that moment, people sometimes were spoiled. They had an Apple visitation. Okay, you're going to go meet with the executives in the finances team there at Apple. And I arrived. I was the only person to turn up for probably, 45 minutes or something. So Tim's in there with his immediate team of people and me. And it was awkward for me because I felt really embarrassed that they had their whole executive team there and there's me, and I'm not qualified to be meeting with this executive team all these years back. But the reason I share it is it tells you something about Apple's position then versus now.
Correct.
Right.
It says something about being spoiled at the GSB, but it also says it's unthinkable now for the same situation to take place. But at that time, it's later than you're describing, but there were 3 $10 billion businesses. And that's it. That's the whole company. And could there be a fourth $10 billion business? And of course, as you describe it, there's been this whole Tim phase that has sought to be true to those, to that spirit and principles and ways of thinking and ways of doing business that were incorporated, when you were there and when Steve was there.
Right. Well, thanks, guys. Everyone's got better things to do now than talk about Apple and Steve and
Jeremy. Give us the last word.
No, Ron, it's awesome to learn from you. You're a wonderful professor. I really love your statement, I wrote it down. Kindness is a choice. I think it's a great thing to remember. It's not a gift; it's a choice. Maybe one could say it's a choice that becomes a gift to others. And I appreciate that being a mantra that you've lived by. I think it's a great thing for all of us, and something clearly that even impacted Steve and how he thought about delivering messages. So thank you very much for sharing your time. I know that it's sometimes, diving back into the past can be emotional, but I really appreciate you being willing to go there with us and share with us. It means a lot to us. And we hope that lots of people, as you said, really glean insights from this session and are able to implement them into their lives in meaningful ways. So thanks again. And thanks everyone for listening. Until next time, we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.